Today is the last Sunday in Epiphany. Epiphany is the season of light. If you can remember back, it started with a blaze of light from the star in the east. This was right after Christmas. And now today, on this Transfiguration Sunday, it culminates with the light on Jesus' face, which, as I just read, shone like the sun. Jesus' public ministry began with his baptism, but it ended with his decision to go to Jerusalem, which meant that from there on, his days would be numbered. The baptism is easy to visualize. Were you to go today to the Holy Land to see the spot where it happened, I am sure there would be a guide who would be more than happy to satisfy your curiosity by showing you precisely how and where it occurred. But the Transfiguration, that's different. The text states that it occurred on a high mountain, but scholars aren't 100% sure as to which one it was. We know that Peter, James, and John were with Jesus. That much is clear. But how did Moses and the prophet Elijah get there? And furthermore, how would the disciples have been able to recognize them in the first place? Bottom line, what sense can be made of the Transfiguration? Sometimes when there are stories like this, it's tempting not to try. This reminds me of the account of a man who takes his new hunting dog on a trial hunt. After a while, he manages to shoot a duck, and it fell in the lake. But then what happened next was astounding, because the dog walked on water, picked up the duck between his teeth, and carried it back to his new master. The man was incredulous, not knowing what to make of it. He didn't dare tell anyone about it for fear people would think he was nuts. And so instead, he decided to invite his neighbor to go along with him. And the very same thing happened. Each time a duck would get shot, the dog would walk across the water and retrieve it. Yet the neighbor never said a word about it. Ooh. Technical difficulties here. Finally, the new owner, not able to contain himself any longer, asked the big question. He said, I was just wondering, do you notice anything unusual about this dog? Come to think of it, I do, said the neighbor. It seems to me that this dog doesn't know how to swim. Can't explain it? Then don't even think about it. That's the way we work. And no one can explain the Transfiguration. But that doesn't mean we're not to think about it. It doesn't take away from the fact that this mountaintop experience was truly awe-inspiring. For us mortals, yes, it's inconceivable, but then when one thinks about it longer, much of our God-given life is. We can't explain a lot of things that happen, but we can still and are mandated to try to understand. Here in the context of today's passage, the disciples, I think, needed to be shown that regardless of what was about to happen, God was still in control. Yes, Jesus, God's chosen Son, would suffer, and yes, he would die. Yes, it would appear that he had succumbed to the powers that be. Yes, it would look as if he had been totally defeated. But the truth of the matter is that nonetheless, Jesus is the King of Kings. And despite the suffering, despite the crucifixion, he would and will rule forever. So that the immediate and tragic events don't overwhelm them, God offers them a preview on the top of the mountain, a victorious preview. And for this very short moment in time, things are on earth as they are in heaven. All is as it eventually will be. And I love the quote from the movie The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. It says, everything will be all right in the end. If it's not all right, then it's not the end. And now God himself is relaying that message to the disciples. To make a simple analogy, think of a 1,500-piece jigsaw puzzle. Imagine that you have no idea what the image will be once you've completed it. All you know is that it is your job to put it together. A daunting task. But then, imagine that you are handed the cover. Now you can see for yourself how the puzzle is going to look upon completion. And what a difference that makes to have the picture there in front of you. Translated, it is as if during this critical and crucial juncture in time, the disciples were given a glimpse of the picture. They were shown the picture on the box so that they could move forward into the future without losing their faith and without being paralyzed by fear. An amazing happening, but it makes sense. So the question is, what about us today? Do we ever have epiphanies like these in our lifetime? Do we have those moments in time when we, for a very brief moment, catch glimpses of God's glory? I think we do. And I think one prime example is when we fall in love. Do you remember what that was like? Dick and I attended the same United Methodist Church for 4 years, right? Was it 4? Yeah. He always says 4. I say 5. I gave in today. 4 years. Avoiding each other like the plague. No exaggeration. Until he had been invited to a party and was desperate for a date. And I had just announced before them that I was planning to move to Alaska. Safe. Well, as it happened that evening, we fell in love at the party, no less. And about a week later, Dick and I were crossing the street when our poor innocent pastor had the misfortune of stopping at a red light. We ran out in front of his car. We told him our news. Never mind that the light had then turned green, and there were cars lined up behind him. But we thought that this miracle was way too important, and he had to hear it now. Falling in love is a time in our lives when God shows us the other person in full glory. And through the eyes of love, that person looks dazzling to us. Absolutely radiant. And we see him or her in full splendor. And the memory of that experience stays with us, frozen in time, never to be forgotten. Like the Transfiguration experience, it's life on earth as it is in heaven. And it serves a purpose because that moment of glory, excuse me, that moment of glory, you can have a short conversation between you two. Yes, well, serves a purpose. That moment of glory exists not only for its own sake, but it stays within us. And if we let it, it transforms us, it transforms our relationship on a daily basis so that we can keep alive the image of what our earlier glimpse revealed. Sometimes people have these epiphany experiences at the end of their lives. I read about one man, don't worry, I won't be giving communion this morning. I will be asking another person to fill in. But I read about a man, a pastor, in fact, who had broken his neck. And in the midst of his agonizing pain, he wrote that he suddenly experienced an inrush of light. And he recognized it as the presence of Jesus Christ. And in his words, he was, and I quote, swept up into an unspeakable exhilaration of glory. And then he said, it's true. In the midst of my darkest days, I realized that, yes, Jesus Christ really is the light of the world. This was a pastor speaking. Jesus Christ really is the light of the world. Somehow that awareness, as fleeting as it was enough to see him through whatever it was that he had to endure. And for a moment in time, he did experience life on earth as it is in heaven. So the question I'm asking this morning is, can you hold on to the experiences you have had, those moments of glory that you've known? Can you make them matter to you in the way that you live? The parents of Amy Beale could. Do you remember that name, Amy Beale? She was a Fulbright scholar from Stanford University, and she was instrumental in helping to develop voter registration for South African blacks. And in the time that she had been there, she'd come to love that country and her people. And in fact, you might say that that place had transfigured her. But one hot day in August, she was driving 3 black women into town when a group of youths pelted her car with stones, and they forced her to stop. And she was then pulled from the car. She was struck in the head with a brick, and then she was beaten and stabbed to death. She was murdered at the young age of 26. And so the question is, what was the parents' response? The parents chose to keep Amy's glimpse of glory alive. In fact, they actually moved to South Africa so as to work with the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission so as to grant amnesty to those 4 youths who had been imprisoned and were serving life sentences for murder. This was the parents' statement to the press. In the case of the 4 amnesty applicants, we hope that they will receive the support necessary to live productive lives in a nonviolent atmosphere. In fact, they added, we hope, we want the spirit of Amy and of those like her to be a force in their lives now. Why? Because Amy, in her lifetime, had been given a glimpse of glory. Her eyes had seen that glory, a radiant and dazzling vision of what life could be. And her parents did everything they could to keep her transfiguration experience alive. Transfiguration Sunday is a day that's meant for all of us. It's a reminder that Christ has the power to resurrect our own epiphanies, to give us our own transfiguration experiences. And once given, Transfiguration Sunday through Christ gives us the will to keep the experience alive. Those times of clarity, those times of perfect love, those times when we can see perfect death, those visions that give us courage and power to move forward, even when confusion reigns and uncertainty prevails. And so may we be given the grace to remember the glory, not only with our minds, but with our hearts and with our lives. Thanks be to God. Amen.